How you doing? My name is Joshua Petty. This is the week 8 assignment. My persuasive speech. I chose to do it on gun control legislation, and whether or not it's more of an advantage or disadvantage to civilians in America. And I decided, in my opinion, that it's more of a disadvantage. And it goes like this. Gun control legislation is more of a disadvantage to me than an advantage to civilians in America. The unforgettable Las Vegas mass shooting on October 1st, 2007, during the Harvest Festival, is where authorities say a gunman fired assault-style rifles for 11 minutes from a 32nd floor window of the Mandalay Bay Hotel, even switched windows throughout the shooting, killing 59 people and wounding several hundred more. And then he put a pistol in his own mouth and killed himself. This is an example of legislation not being advantageous for gun control in America. Now, obviously, we know that the gunman didn't get his rifles legally, but this is more to my point that a criminal doesn't have to go through legislation to do what they're going to do. That's why they're considered criminals in the first place. Guns do not kill people, in my opinion. Individuals that are disobedient to laws kill people. So when I think of a criminal, that's what I think about. I don't think about legislation abhorring the criminal, because in my opinion, if you're a criminal, you could care less about a law and furthermore any legislation. With gun control legislation, these laws affect law-abiding citizens who are not committing these atrocious acts of violence with firearms in the first place. Making stricter laws for persons who care nothing about following laws is counterproductive. This goes into what I stated in my intro. If I am a criminal looking to do a criminal act, I could care less about a law or provision or restriction that has been brought about through legislation. My whole motive is to go against the rules, not follow the rules in the first place. These laws take away from self-defense from individuals who do not commit crimes in the first place. 61% of men and 56% of women surveyed by Pew Research said that stricter gun laws would make it more difficult to protect and defend their families. So what you have in this situation is, as a gun owner, and most gun owners have this same mindset, that the only way to stop a criminal with a gun is to have a gun yourself. I certainly agree with this on a personal note. I keep my guns simply because I want to protect myself. I don't want to cause any harm to anyone. I'm not thinking of performing any atrocious acts. But if some crazed individual comes upon me with a weapon and I don't have a weapon, it's pretty difficult to defend yourself. Most gun owners have that same mindset as I do. These strict laws can also get in the way of gun owners who take part in hunting and sport shooting. So we have to understand, with rifles and with pistols, it's not even just protecting yourself. It's a lot of fun. Just working on your aiming, working on your hunting. All of this stuff is kind of like prohibited or rather restricted to a certain extent because we have a few bad apples. Stricter laws hurt law-abiding citizens. They do not hurt criminals who could care less about legislation. I mean, again, I don't know how to reiterate that more, but a criminal can care less about some laws and legislation. A law-abiding citizen will follow legislation and guidelines to obtain that firearm, but a criminal will most likely have no intent on following rules to get a firearm. If a criminal needs a weapon, they will find a way to obtain one way or the other, whether it's robbing, whether it's getting a friend to do it. I mean, again, we're talking about a criminal. I'm not following your rules if I'm a criminal and I'm looking forward to committing a heinous act. Law professors at Yale Law and Stanford Law Schools, respectively, stated that between 2005 and 2010, 1.4 million guns were stolen from U.S. homes during property crimes, including burglary and car theft. Clearly, legislation does not deter a criminal. Too much gun control could possibly lead the way to a tyrannical government. This is most definitely a touchy subject, but it's something that I consider personally. I have to look at it with a shady eye when my government wants me to turn in all my guns and feels like they should be the only ones with guns, themselves in the military. If you think about it, why would you take away one's right to bear an arm unless there's something else up your sleeve? But we're not going to get deep into that and get off the subject. But definitely, if we were looking forward to a tyranny, that would be the best way to do it. Take the weapons from the public. I mean, it's a free-for-all from that point. Computer databases make it very easy to track gun owners and take their weapons if need be. There is no way to track a criminal who has obtained a firearm illegally. Speaks for itself. The people should have the right to bear arms and if needed, protect themselves from any arbitrary government. I would agree that law-abiding gun owners should be very careful with their weapons and all safety precautions should be taught and enforced. But the right to bear arms and the right to defend yourself should never be in question. According to Pew Research, in February 2013, 57% of people said that strict gun control laws give too much power to the government over civilians. So there you have it again. I'm not by myself. You know, you're talking about 57% of the mass people that they interviewed and researched and surveyed. 57%, which is more than half of the people, say, hey, wait a minute. You know, what are we doing here? How strict are we going to go? You know, we're doing these laws and legislation, but you're taking from law-abiding citizens, you're taking our weapons away, whereby if a criminal needs something, he's not going to do it the route that I'm doing. He's not going to put his name on it. He's not going to go through the process. So it's almost like, hey, what are you doing? Are you clearly trying to take everybody's guns away? So that's something to think about as well. Basically, in my closing, I want to add that firearms accounted for 1.3% of deaths in the United States between 1999 and 2013. Let's just think about that. Firearms themselves accounted for 1.3% of deaths in the United States between 1999 and 2013. That's 14 years. Well, unfortunately, firearm-related suicides accounted for 61% of those gun deaths. If you really think about that, in 14 years, which is from 99 to 2013, there were only 1.3% of the deaths in the United States caused by firearms. And out of that 1.3% of total deaths in those 14 years that was with firearms, 61% of those were suicides. Now, that's nothing to praise, but that simply means that less than 40% of those deaths were heinous activity with firearms. Law-abiding gun owners are not committing these atrocious acts of gun violence, and they are not committing these mass shootings. This stricter legislation is taken away from self-defense of gun owners, and they follow the rules. They go through all the processes put before them. Criminals have no desire to do that. It is also taken away from freedoms of hunting and game shooting. Stricter legislation does not deter a criminal who already doesn't abide by laws in the first place. And on top of that, gun-related killings are not as frequent as often advertised. And if a criminal wants to obtain a weapon, they will do so one way or another. And this is a big thing that we really don't think about. Sometimes, for instance, if I'm for legislation of stricter gun laws, it's so easy for me to put out in the press every time there's a death or every time there's an activity involving a firearm. But if you look at the facts, if you research for yourself, these things are not happening by law-abiding gun owners. They're not They are not happening by people who are at home raising their families and want to feel safe and want to protect their wives, their girlfriends, their children, their mothers, their aunts, their uncles, their brothers and sisters. All of this. They not going out committing mass shootings. They not doing ridiculous type deals with their firearms. They have their firearms because they feel safe. They want to be protectors. That's who we are in our household. We are protectors. We're not violent criminals. We're not trying to do anything atrocious or anything of that nature. But on the flip side, you affect me with the stricter legislation, and the guy who can care less about your rules is still going to do whatever that he desires to do with his firearm. That's why it's more of a disadvantage than an advantage, in my opinion. So, in saying that, too much gun control can leave citizens defenseless against an arbitrary government. We don't need that. So, again, this is my persuasive speech. I think stricter gun control legislation is far more disadvantage than it is advantages. It does not deter a criminal when in fact, what is a criminal? A criminal is someone who's going to commit an act of violence and they could care less about right or wrong and they could care less about a law or a rule. So setting more laws and more rules is not going to deter this criminal. Yes, you can make it way more difficult for anyone to obtain a firearm. But at the end of the day, if I'm a law-abiding citizen and I desire to go by the process and do what it takes to get it done the correct way, then again, a criminal can always come and retrieve my firearm. So at the end of the day, a criminal is going to be a criminal, and a law-abiding citizen is going to be a law-abiding citizen. So gun control legislation is far more disadvantaged.